over the waistline.
Welcome back to the final segment of today's edition of Butler on Business. And still with us is Chris Marola. Chris owns Red Momentum Strategies. He is a political consultant primarily to conservative Republican office holders and would-be office holders. Chris, I know you're a bit of a history buff. Let me go over a couple of these items. It was on this day in 1513 that Ponce de Leon actually landed in Florida. You know, he spotted Florida for the first time on April 1st. Well, it was April 2nd, 1513, that he came ashore. It was on this day in 1860 that the first Pony Express riders left St. Joseph's, Missouri for Sacramento, California. It took them 10 days. Now, the Pony Express, Chris, do you realize it only lasted about a year and a half?
Yeah, it didn't last very long, did it?
No, it didn't. It was on this day in 1936 that Richard Bruno Hauptmann was executed for the kidnapping and death of the son of Charles and Anne Lindbergh. You know, I read an excellent article about Richard Bruno Hauptmann called The Airman and the Carpenter. And unfortunately, from the evidence that surfaced later, they executed a innocent man there.
For real?
Yeah, and the governor of New Jersey did his best to try to stay the execution. I mean, they wanted somebody's head, and unfortunately, old Bruno Hauptmann's head is who they had. Now, he did have some of the ransom money that was paid. They were marked notes, and he had them in his possession. He claimed that, you know, this friend of his had given him a box for safekeeping, and when his friend passed away, he opened up the box and found the money and did what most people would do, spend it. And that's how they traced it back to Bruno Hauptmann. So he did know one of the kidnappers. He claimed he was innocent. His wife claimed he was innocent. The New Jersey governor thought he was innocent. A number of people did, but he was executed nonetheless. It's an excellent book. I don't know if it's in print anymore or not. I read it probably 10 or 15 years ago.
Wow. So the most he was guilty of was using money that he should not have. He should have figured out it's probably stolen money or something of that nature.
Well, it was the ransom money, marked ransom money. Hey, I'll tell you how far we've come. It was on this date in 1986 that our national debt hit $2 trillion.
What day was that?
It was on this day, April 2nd, this is April 3rd. What day is this? Yeah, we're on the 3rd. April 3rd, 1986. We hit, the national debt hit $2 trillion. It was on this day in 1998 that the Dow Jones climbed above 9,000 for the first time, and the NASDAQ on this day set a one-day record when it lost 349 points to close at 4,233, and we're nowhere near that high right now.
No. Of course, you could attribute a lot of what happened with the Dow, now we're in the 14,000 range, to inflation, could you not?
No, absolutely. It's all about the money printing. Chris, normally I start doing a little bit of U.S. history, and I go back to you being a bug, the Articles of Confederation. How well-versed are you on the Articles of Confederation?
I know a thing or two about them.
Well, for those who do not, they came up with the Articles of Confederation after the Declaration of Independence. And the Articles of Confederation wind up being almost like a bridge document at the time, which eventually led to the Constitution of the United States. But Congress turned to deciding the political and economic powers that it would be given, as well as those that would be granted to the states in the Articles of Confederation. Is there anything you want to comment on that?
No, I'm following you.
All right. Well, after more than a year of debate among these delegates, the allocation of powers was articulated in the Articles of Confederation, and only Congress would have the authority to declare war. And, of course, that survived into the final document, our Constitution. Chris, how did we get so far away from the Constitution when it comes to war powers? You know, I mean, supposedly only the Congress can declare war, but we haven't had a declared war since the Korean police action. Although I do think Bush 43 came close to getting a war declaration. He did get a resolution.
Yeah, that's what I would like to say. I mean, even Dennis Kucinich, who's very super liberal, said that at least Bush got some kind of congressional approval for the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, where you look at Obama, he started an illegal, unconstitutional war in Libya without congressional approval. He got the UN's approval, which makes absolutely no sense. The United Nations has no legal authority to declare war or to supersede our Constitution. So, yeah, I mean, Bush, I think, to his credit, there's a lot of things that I give George W. Bush credit for, in the sense that he was a man of character and integrity. Sure, he spent too much money. Sure, he made some decisions I didn't like. But when you talk about character and respect for our institutions, I think he did a much better job than our current president. I think, getting back to your original question, where did we go wrong? I think everything begins around the Woodrow Wilson era, when the so-called progressives began their march on our country with their very socialistic dogma. That's when you see a lot of this. I mean, look at Wilson. He was running for re-election, telling America he was going to keep us out of war, while behind the scenes preparing for World War I.
Oh, absolutely. One other thing that I think is interesting to note, in the Articles of Confederation, the Congress was not given the power to tax or regulate commerce, and the expenses of commerce were to be made from a common treasury with funds supplied by the states. The revenue was to be generated from exercising the power granted to the states to determine their own internal taxes. You know, I have done in the past a series on how we went from no income tax to an income tax. Now, it got codified during the Wilson administration. You know, 1913 wound up being a very bad year. I mean, we got the Federal Reserve that year. We got the Constitution that year. If I'm not mistaken, we got the direct election of senators during that time frame as well.
Yeah, that was the 17th Amendment that we spoke of, and that, I think, was the worst of all, because if you want to know where our Constitution took the largest hit, and since you were speaking of states versus federal government and federalism, that was the biggest hit, I think, to federalism right there, was the 17th Amendment, which was ratified, as you said, in, let me see if I can find it. Oh, that was ratified, April 8th, 1913, the 17th Amendment.
Well, it was not until November of 1777 that the Congress actually approved the final draft of the Articles, and it took over 3 years for the states to ratify the Articles of Confederation, and the primary reason for the delay was a dispute over control of land in the West, because, you know, some of the states had claims while others did not. I don't know if you knew that.
Yes, no, I did know that.
Well, the Articles were then ratified and put into effect on March the 1st, 1781, and this was just a few months before the American victory at Yorktown.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. You know, our constitutional expert, Chris Ann Hall, she'll be joining us tomorrow. She always does a good job on this stuff. Not that you're not. I'm just thought I'd do that. Have you ever heard our interviews with Chris Ann?
Yeah, actually I have. Listen, I don't claim to be an expert, so no, you haven't offended me one bit. I just claim to be a student of history, especially American history. But what I'd like to say is that decade where Woodrow Wilson, that 8-year period, that in that time period of that decade where he was president, was probably the worst in American history combined, because we've got all of these terrible pieces of legislation plus these amendments. Think about it. From the Wilson era, we got the income tax, which is the 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment, which takes the rights of the states to appoint their own senators away from them, and so makes races for Senate basically a popularity contest instead of an act of federalism. And then we also got the 18th Amendment, okay, which is, as you know, the whole problem with alcohol and everything that happened, everything that came with prohibition came by way of the 18th Amendment, and those are all pushed by the progressives. What people don't know is the liberal progressives, the Democrats, gave us prohibition.
I didn't realize that. Hey, we're almost out of time. We're down to about a minute and a half, and this is a super hard break. But obviously, right off the bat, there were some kinks with the Articles of Confederation. So rather than amend the Articles, they reconvened and decided that they would replace the Articles of Confederation entirely with a new form of national government under our Constitution. And that's the history of the Articles of Confederation. You know, one other interesting point, the Articles did mandate or did include language that gave the Congress the power to, the sole power for the post office. The Constitution only gives the Congress powers to create them, and the postal monopoly was actually legislation and not constitutional.
Oh, yeah, that would make sense. I'd also like to say thank God for Patrick Henry. He argued for a Bill of Rights. He said the Constitution alone, without the Bill of Rights, was incomplete. And if we had not a Bill of Rights, imagine how much worse we would be today if there wasn't a Bill of Rights impeding.
Chris, I hate to cut you off. This is it. This is Alan Butler, Butler on Business. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Have a good day.